So welcome to my channel for my biology videos as I continue to look at nutrient cycles. So today we are going to focus on what we are calling as being nutrient cycles. But of course we need to define what is a nutrient cycle. So a nutrient cycle shows the different forms of a particular element or nutrient in different parts of the environment and the processes involved in converting it from one form to another. So that is what we call as being a nutrient cycle. Now, of course, you need to remember that, there are so many nutrient cycles that show the different forms of a particular element and being recycled in the environment and the processes involved in doing that. Now, some of the nutrient cycles that you need to know is what we are calling one as being the carbon cycle. We also have what we are simply calling as being the nitrogen cycle. And of course, we do have what we simply call as being the water cycle. So these are some of the nutrient cycles that you need to know. So these are going to be coming in the exam, especially, carbon and nitrogen. So they may require you to use a word label diagram to actually, show or to describe the carbon, the nitrogen, or the water cycle. So I'm going to start with the carbon cycle and how I can show you how you can come up with this cycle. It is very simple. Just pay attention, stay tuned to my discussion. So let's start with what we are calling as being the carbon cycle. Now, what exactly is the carbon cycle? Well, the carbon cycle is simply a cycle that shows how carbon is actually circulated in the environment and the various parts of the environment where it is found. So therefore, we can ask ourselves, what parts is the carbon going to be found in the environment? So we can talk about, the parts, and form. So we can talk about the parts and forms where carbon is actually found in the environment. So in the environment, you can find one, this carbon, it is going to be found in plants. So plants contain, carbon, but in what form is it going to be? Well, it is actually in form of organic molecules. So it is going to be in form of organic molecules. Remember the glucose that is going to be there, the carbon may actually be stored in form of food. Once the glucose has actually been produced, it is going to be stored in various forms. It consists of carbon. Two, the carbon also does exist in animals. Of course, in what form is it going to be? Again, we can simply say in form of organic molecules. So there are certain organic molecules that are going to be containing carbon in animals. And of course, much of our body is simply made up of carbon. Another part of the environment where this carbon may be found is actually in the atmosphere. So you need to remember it can be found in the atmosphere. Now, in the atmosphere, this carbon is going to exist in the form of carbon dioxide gas. So it actually exists in the form of carbon, in the form of CO2. So it exists in the form of carbon dioxide gas. Apart from that, it can also be found in the soil, but in what form is it going to be existing? Well, if it is in the soil, then it is going to be in the form of what we call as being fossil fuels. And sometimes it may be found as carbonates. No wonder you see limestone being mined. So it is because of those carbonates. So when you want to describe the carbon cycle, you need to know the parts and the forms in which carbon is going to be found in the environment. And remember, we have said it can be found in plants in form of organic molecules, in animals as well in form of organic molecules that are, an animal contains, also in the atmosphere in form of carbon dioxide gas, and in the soil in form of fossil fuel or crude oil as you may call it. And carbonates. Now, how can you come up with a carbon cycle? Well, it is very simple. You need to know processes that help to remove carbon in form of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and those processes that will help to retain carbon back into what we are calling as being the atmosphere. So that is what we are going to talk about. So let me talk about major processes, in the carbon major processes in the carbon cycle. Then you'll be able to construct a diagram relating to that. So I'll start with major processes that that actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the major processes that help to remove carbon from the atmosphere, the major one is what you can simply call as being photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the major process that help to remove carbon in form of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Remember, in the process we are calling as being photosynthesis, plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use it in this process. Of course, in the presence of sunlight, they are going to convert it to glucose. Remember what we said, carbon dioxide plus, H2O in the presence of what we are calling as being sunlight. Of course, we can say over chlorophyll, this carbon dioxide, when it combines with that, it is going to produce glucose, and of course oxygen is going to be liberated in such a form. So you can find that once plants carry out photosynthesis, the carbon that they absorb in form of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is locked into plant tissues. So that is what you need to remember. So the carbon is locked in plant tissue, so it becomes part of the plant. So this is the major process that will help to remove carbon dioxide from what we are calling as being the atmosphere. Apart from that, mainly you can also talk about, sometimes maybe I can talk about ocean atmosphere exchange. What do I mean when I say ocean atmosphere exchange? Well, you're going to find that oceans actually absorb carbon dioxide from the air and actually release it back. It's like a giant carbon sponge. That is the way it actually behaves. So you're going to find that some of the carbon that is absorbed by the ocean is actually used by marine organisms to build, shells, which later on become sedimentary rocks. So sometimes you can talk about ocean atmosphere exchange. Now, what about those processes that help to add, this carbon, that help to add carbon back into the atmosphere? What are some processes that help to add carbon back into the atmosphere? So there are a lot. For example, you can talk about respiration, which is the opposite of photosynthesis. It will help to return back the carbon into the atmosphere. Remember, both animals, you're going to find that both animals and plants, of course, during the night when it comes to plants, they release carbon dioxide back into the air when they break down glucose to form energy. So both, in this case, animals and plants are going to carry out this one. But mainly, plants carry out respiration during the night time. So what is going to happen? The glucose that they do have is going to be broken down to release carbon dioxide and what we are calling as being H2O. But in the process, energy is also going to be given out. So that's one of the process. Apart from that, you are going to find that also decomposition. So we can talk about decomposition, or you can simply say decay. So when dead organisms are broken down by bacteria and fungi, so you're going to find that things that die, like plants and animals, they can be decomposed, And as these are being decomposed by bacteria and fungi, they help to retain the carbon back into the atmosphere. Another process that I can talk about is simply combustion. Well, combustion is simply the burning of fossil fuel. So we're simply talking about burning over fossil fuels. So when fossil fuels are burnt, they help to retain carbon in form of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So very important processes that you can simply talk about. Of course, sometimes when it comes to combustion, because of the fossil fuels, when they are burnt, they help to retain it back. So when you want to describe the carbon cycle, you should know the processes that help to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that includes the main process is actually photosynthesis. You can also have ocean atmosphere exchange, but not common, of course. You can focus on photosynthesis. Then those that help to add carbon in form of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, respiration, decomposition, and also combustion. So let's try to draw now the carbon cycle, since you know the processes that help to add and remove carbon from the atmosphere. So what we can do, we can simply say there, if I want to remember, we want to write that, so I can simply say I can simply say carbon, I can simply say carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So remember, the carbon in the atmosphere is going to be in form of carbon dioxide. Then what are we going to have? We can have what we are calling as being plants. So plants there can be there, and maybe I can simply put up what I'm calling as being animals. In most cases, maybe I can say even those that are herbivores. Yeah, but of course, even those that are not herbivores, you'll be able to see. Then here, I can simply say, maybe I can simply say, bacteria and fungi. So let me say bacteria and, fungi. So that is what I can talk about. Right, so bacteria and fungi there. That is what we can say. Now, apart from that, maybe this side, let me put up what I'm calling as being fossil, fuel. All right. So now you can connect, this puzzle by looking at the processes that help to remove and those that help to add. So during the course of the day, plants can actually absorb, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in a process we are calling as being photosynthesis. So therefore here I can put up what I'm calling as being photosynthesis. All right. At the same time, during the night time, when plants, carry out, respiration, they can also carry out respiration and actually return the carbon back into the atmosphere. During the night time, plants can carry out what we are calling as being respiration. It is possible. Of course, what you're going to see again is that plants can actually be eaten, in this case by animals, especially those we are calling as being herbivores. So we can simply say eaten or eating there. So they can be eaten by animals. These animals can later on, die because they are not permanent. So there will be death. And of course, the plants themselves can actually die, so they could also be death there. So once plants, animals die, bacteria and fungi will decompose them. Now, when they decompose them, as those things start to decay, they are going to be retained back into the atmosphere. So decay, or you can simply say decomposition there. So they will be retained back into the atmosphere. So the carbon stored in animals, plants and animals, once the bacteria and fungi decompose them, decomposition takes place, the carbon stored in them will be retained back into the atmosphere. We do not want to forget that animals actually carry out a very important process which we are calling as being respiration. So that is what you need to remember. Apart from that, sometimes when animals, die, sometimes when plants die, over a period of so many years, both plants and animals can actually be changed into fossil fuel. So that process is simply called fossilization. So that is what we call fossilization. So that's what you see fossil fuel are going to be made. So now as humans, when we use this fossil fuel, for example, in vehicles and other things, we burn it. And that process is what we call as being combustion. That process is what we call as being combustion. So combustion, when combustion of fossil fuel takes place, it actually retains the carbon back into the atmosphere. So this diagram that you see here is simply describing what we are calling as being the carbon cycle. So in an exam, they can tell you to describe the carbon cycle. This is how simple you can simply do it. In my next video, I'm going to show you some few questions and how you can go about answering them. Thank you so much for paying attention.